Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and today we're going to be talking about how to write a therapeutic primer. Now, this is something that comes up mainly in the medical professions and in the biomedical research area, but it is something that is a good thing to be aware of as a genre and to be able to understand how to use and sometimes to create, because understanding therapeutic targets helps you explore not just the most common therapies, but also to think about potential off-label uses, substitutions in emergency situations or in supply chain disruptions, and other things like that, and also to understand and explain to patients the course of a therapy. This is one of our less formal webinars in this series, and so we're going to be looking at a precision medicine assignment here that happens to involve immunotherapy drug targets and resistance mechanisms. And so if we look at the instructions here, it lays out one way to approach writing this task of how to write a primer. And I want to highlight here that the instructions here indicate to choose one therapeutic thing, whatever it is, that is being investigated in clinical trials, and that your task is to write a 1 to 2 page primer, so not very long, very specific, and to have these 5 sections. Now, I will say that the most common mistake that I see from students is to not treat this as a list of requirements, but to treat it as a list of suggestions. There are in fact 5 sections here because you're going to be graded in part on whether you have those 5 sections and the appropriate content in it. So please, these are instructions in the requirement sense, not the suggestion sense. And there's also the recommendation to look at this resource here, an editor's perspective on how to write a primer here, which is written by the editor here of a journal that happens to be focused on primers. And you'll see that this has a number of notes here about the importance of section headings set by the journal. When it says a rigid article structure with section headings set by the journal, that means they will not accept your article if it doesn't follow that exact subject. So when we look at this assignment here, it is in part preparing you for the expectations if you were to write one of these up and submit it for a journal to be published, because that sort of targeted journal wants everything to be in a consistent format, so you always know where to look things up. And if we look at the rest of the items here, particularly the aim of being an introductory but authoritative read, so you give the reader a view that goes a little bit more than surface, and that you back it up with citations, and especially citations from current literature. If we look at the assignments here, this is asking you to find something that is actively being investigated in clinical trials. And so your next question might be, well, how do I find that? Now, if your first response is to just type in list of clinical drug trials into the internet search engine of your choice, your instinct would be quite good, because the definitive clearinghouse here in the United States is clinicaltrials.gov, which is just as the URL sounds. It is a government website for looking up clinical trials. Now, there are a couple other things that will steer you towards that, and in fact, you could look at the World Health Organization if you were interested in working and publishing in another country. But let's head to the source, the one that everyone is pointing you towards. And so if we look here, we see if we're doing this assignment where you are looking for therapeutic approaches for tumor cell killing, well, let's take a look at what comes up here. So we have condition or disease, search for tumor, for cancer. Look at interventions. Perhaps you're wondering, is this thing being used for that? And when I was in Madagascar, this was actually a very popular question from people who were wondering about whether their local health practices were being used outside. And, there were a number of Western drug companies that were investigating things through clinical trials of some traditional medicines. And so you might do a search here, and let's search for tumors. And okay, let's go ahead and do a search for that. Now we have almost 100,000 results. That's far more than we want to be investigating. We can do some things to narrow this down. And so we might look, for example, exclude the completed and terminated. So let's look for active, but that's active not recruiting. So that would be going on and but not getting more participants. So if we choose this as well as recruiting, then we have a pool that are running in some fashion. If we select not yet recruiting, that's not going to really give us any data about how it's doing. So if we deselect that and we move back to active not recruiting, well, that's running. And let's go ahead and see what happens when we apply that filter. Now we're down to 7,000. Now that's still a lot. We've still got a lot of things to potentially go through, but keep in mind, we're not doing something exhaustive. We're looking for a therapeutic that's being investigated for this purpose, and then to write about it. So we've got a ton of choices here. Let's see if we might be more specific here and look at potential interventions. If you're ever wondering, they have these nifty information pop-ups here. So if you're wondering, hold on, what's an intervention again? Don't worry, just click on it and look it up. But in this case, we could go ahead and say we want to limit this to the United States. For whatever reasons, you might say, all right, I want to do U.S. research. Now, tumors are listed here. COVID-19 might not be what you're interested in here. But if we're looking at, say, solid tumors here, we have a number of candidates that are popping up right away here. And so let's go ahead and put in another location thing. Let's say we want to do Texas, just the whole state. Want to do something local to where you live and work. See, okay, we have a couple things that are using monoclonal antibodies. Now, if you're looking at these drugs and you're wondering, well, what does this name mean? The clue is in the suffix, the last few letters. So if we look at selumetinib and niraparib, and in the second entry, durvalumab, the clue is in the naming. So MAB at the end means monoclonal antibody. And if we went ahead and say looked at Calyx, which is a nice handy reference here, we could see that when we're looking at selumetinib, the naming here, the anib tells us that's an angiogenesis inhibitor, and that the tinib is going to be a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. And that takes us back to that question of what is the therapeutic target? What is being affected? And so if we have something that is being inhibited, well, that's generally our target. Now, a monoclonal antibody is something that is going to be attaching to something and neutralizing it in some shape or form. And the exact thing is going to vary, but it's still going to be a monoclonal antibody because it has the MAB in the name. And you can drill into these a little bit more with the syllables before the last one. And the second and third can also be very important in terms of understanding. But if we're looking at, as you can see explained here, this particular drug is a monoclonal antibody, and the name tells us something about the origin, that it's humanized, and that it's acting in the circulatory system, which is to say the cardiovascular system, since the CI, and then the MAB is, again, monoclonal antibody. So you're looking for a target, and we want to be identifying and discussing the therapeutic target, the mechanism of action, the target population, potential biomarkers, and how new is this? Is it something that's being tried a lot, or is it just they're doing a larger study? Are there potential resistance mechanisms? And so we might go as your search and be looking, because we have that list of 5 things to fill in, but we need to expand that to be 1 to 2 pages. So we need a couple sentences for each. So you might add here resistance and look and see, okay, what do we have here? Now, if we were to say, look at this one with dexamethasone, well, resistance, that's going to be an issue. Now, whether that's resistance with the therapy that is actively fighting tumors, or if that is something that is with the steroids. I'm guessing it's going to be with the steroids here. So that'd be an example of something that would not be appropriate here, because it's not about resistance to the therapeutic approach to killing the tumor cells. It's about having energy and lack of inflammation, and to reduce fatigue as a side effect of that. So now if we were going to look for this, let's say that we are looking at, let's go with this one. So the database here gives us an idea of what we're looking at. So they're assessing the pharmacokinetics and efficacy and safety of this particular drug. They're treating this type of cancer and repair anomaly. So that is going to be a mutation of some sort. When it happened, we're not going into that right now, but we see that the trial has a number of different things. They're on phase 2. So they've been through phase 1, they've made it to phase 2. Now, depending on what you might be looking at, this talking about the target population and potential biomarkers of response and resistance, that's a little less likely that we would know about that early on. That's more likely something that would be getting evaluated in a later trial. So going back to our database here, you might say, okay, well, I want to go through here and look at something that is not at phase 2, but I want phase 3. And you might also look and see, okay, these types here, I do want with results, so there's some idea of what's going on. So I'm going to apply those filters. Now we're down to 15 studies here. So this is a much more manageable number to review, keeping in mind that this is leading to a 1 to 2 page assignment. Now, if we're looking at this, we see a number of different studies about that same drug. Okay, we may have something that's combo therapy that looks like it's a single therapy thing. We have, a mutation being listed here. So if you're looking something to write up here, okay, potential biomarkers of resistance, hold on, let's take a look here and see, again, just based on what we've been able to read so far, we see that they're looking at the resistance when they've received this particular thing. This text is a little jumbled up, which is not a problem. You can always copy and paste that to something else, or go to another site to look at the description of this. So this particular study, so we see that there is an expanded access record, and so that gives us a little bit more information about that. And see that they were, in certain cases, they were providing this. All right, going back to our list here, again, we've searched for a number of things that you may be searching for something different. Here, stage 4 of prostate cancer. That is difficult. Now here we have radiation therapy regimens. Okay, so let's say we were looking at this here. And so the first step I would do in looking at this is see, what does the name tell you about what this is? Because you may not know all the drugs being evaluated here, but listartanib. So if we're looking at this, again, going to our roots here, what are our suffixes telling us here? So the IB, what does that tell you? Well, the IB gives us an idea that there is something being inhibited. And so let's look at what we have here. Listartanib. So we've got the tinib here. And so that's going to be a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Okay, yeah, TK inhibitors, they're definitely a big thing in cancer therapy. So what would we be starting to think about if this was something that you were investigating? Well, if we look back at this, we need to be following that rigid set of section headings. So we need to look at this and see, okay, The therapeutic target, we've got the tyrosine kinase, some aspect of that. Now, if we then were going to go ahead and investigate just that particular drug, okay, now we can drill in a little bit more, because if you just said it's a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, that's not super specific. As opposed to, if we're searching specifically for the mechanism of action, we see another level of detail here. And so we can see that by blocking the autophosphorylation of a certain type of tyrosine kinase, or FLT3 here, that reduces the FLT3 activity. So it's that, not tyrosine kinases in general, it's that specific FLT3 thing. And then when it hits that target, we have cells that were overexpressing FLT3, and they undergo apoptosis, they die. So, okay, we're starting to get an idea of how this works. Now, looking at the target population of patients, you can tell just by looking at this that it's probably going to be something that involves that overexpression of FLT3, which is not going to be all cancer cells. And you could, in fact, go to the searching here. I'm going to clear all these filters here, and I'm going to put in here FLT3 and see if that comes up with something. And we have, oh, hey, FLT3 ITD gene mutation, CD135 expression in acute myeloid leukemia. We have in advanced non-small cell lung cancer. So when you are looking at what you're going to be searching for, okay, let's go ahead and we'll put tumors in there and see what we get. So now you can go down the path of looking at, okay, so what is getting hit here? You've got a drug that you're interested in that you know is used with tumors. How is it working? And so looking at these trials will give you an idea of how this is being evaluated. And in fact, going back to this, terminated with results, oh, we can look at the results now and see where that has been published, and see that they were doing this treatment, and you can look at the participant flow or other details here. But overall, if we just skip down to outcome measures, or going to adverse events, or going to publications, perhaps you're interested in something that is more, we'll say, written up. Well, in this case, this last update was just published this month. It is updated this week, in fact. So that means that it's they're probably still working on that article write-up. But you can still view the results and read the preliminary information that has been posted, which will vary. And we see that we have some side effects that are listed here, and you can look and see what's the incidence here, keeping in mind the size of the trial. So if we're looking at the serious adverse effects, well, that is, fortunately, with the trial, given a small sample, but we see, okay, no endotosepsis, that's good. Are there any smoking guns? Well, we do seem to have some increased risk of nervous system disorders, which is kind of to be expected when you're dealing with a tyrosine kinase inhibitor of some sort. So, yeah, this is a question about how you would write this up, but the information, we're getting some here. And if you were doing a search for a study that had, let's say you're looking for something that's being specifically completed and that is also has active recruitment, okay, you could limit for that. In our case, let's look at active not recruiting here. And you see, all right, let's go with, let's say, for the sake of an example, you're looking at this here. And so we see that they're evaluating it with a mutation, which one? And FLT3 mutation positive, so having a mutation there. All right, so we've got some information that you can track down through the normal channels, whether you're looking in a library, whether you're in Google search, or using a database like this. Now, the novelty of the new therapeutic approach and potential resistance mechanisms, this is something where you might want to do some more research, just as you would want to do some research saying, okay, well, based on what I know and what I can find out, those biomarkers of potential response or resistance, well, if it's a narrow target, or it's something that depends on a mutation, okay, so looking at this, they're evaluating it, side effects and best dose for using this combination of two therapies, and how they work with patients with this characteristic that has come back or does not respond, and how are FLT3 positive. All right, there's a lot you could look at in there. Now, this is a study that's been going on for some years. The sample size is low because it's an early phase, and so you may find it easier to find information again if you're looking at a certain stage of trial. So let's go ahead and we'll look at phase 3 for the results that we're seeing so far. So again, this is still talking about FLT3 inhibitors, but we see, that's a lot of places that we're being recruiting. We don't have the results posted yet, so if we're looking at this, well, fortunately, it's not requiring us to really report on the results here. We're talking about a therapy that's in process, and so one of the measures of the novelty, how long has it been going on? Is this being used in something else? Have we seen any publications about it? Not yet, but we have some idea from these different exclusion criteria what they're worried about, or trying to exclude to simplify the design here. And looking at this, if we're talking, we have this FLT3 inhibitor. Okay, well, what's going on here? And you want to make sure you're tracking your acronym, so the AML, that's your acute myeloid leukemia. So look around at the restrictions you're looking for, and if you spend some time looking to make sure that you have enough information to do a write-up, you'll save yourself some false starts. And don't limit yourself to just one particular study here, because there might be more than one study that is looking at things, and you can always cite the additional ones here. But in this case, looking at this, I'm just going to bring up something other than cancer so we can look in a little bit more detail. Let's say we're looking for, let's go particularly with asthma in children. All right, and let's take that out here. And let's say we are looking also for cystic fibrosis. All right. We're going to keep the same other things here. All right, so we're not finding anything because we still have that phase 3 checkbox. Now we're also combining cystic fibrosis, which greatly complicates a lot of lung stuff, with asthma. But there are 3 that are completed. So we could look at this, and what you want to do is avoid using one of these completed ones. Even though it's tempting, you see that there are 3 because this is supposed to be something that is actively being investigated. So if the first mistake that I see, the most common one, is not following the instructions that these are required sections, things that you should have a heading for. The second one is missing that instruction about actively being investigated. Because so far as we can tell from the things we've searched with so far, there are only these completed and terminated studies, and although one is recruiting, it hasn't actually started yet. So now we could also say take that away and look for a target here and say lung protective ventilation, see if that has anything. Well, no, nothing's coming up there. So we have something that is too narrow here, and so you can look at this and say, oh, well, maybe I'm interested in this vaccine. Well, that's particular target. But let's say you're looking at this blood neutrophil thing. So let's see, is this a therapy, or are they trying to learn about the function? Well, this is more an investigational find things about the function and phenotype of these patients' neutrophils. So this would not meet our qualification because it's not talking about a clinical intervention. It's gathering information, not testing something out that we can see in the summary. Now, we see we've got these patients who are being randomized into that, and see, this is why you always want to take a look further, because it looked like there wasn't an intervention when you just looked at this, but it did classify it as interventional. So don't get fooled. Make sure you actually look at the study plan and see what they're testing, because we've got multiple groups here. Stable state, this triple therapy, and then we have the exacerbation group. All right, well, I hope that was helpful. Again, to review this, start with this list here. These are required things, so create a heading for each one to make it clear where the information goes. Go looking for things that have the types of information that will tell you what to look for. And you could look in a journal at one of these primers, but really I think you'll get more of a life, more material that you could potentially work for if you just go to a website like clinicaltrials.gov and start investigating some things. Now, there's always going to be a lot of stuff, and in fact, if we're looking at tumors, you could say select solid tumor there. And we've got a lot of studies there. We'd see if we change that to active not recruiting. We still got a lot. We got various drug things. We have therapeutic trials, these things in solid tumors. And so you have many choices. Let's just be careful about making sure that you're looking for the right things that are meeting the requirements, because it's only a 1 to 2 page paper, so you can afford to spend some time doing the research to make sure you have the things you need to do a full paper on whatever it is you pick as the particular therapeutic approach, its target, the mechanism of action, how it works, to describe the population that they're looking at this in, which can include, remember, the stage of their cancer, not just the cancer itself, and the therapies that they've had so far or undergoing in the trial. That's the line of treatment. And then what might go wrong given that particular target. What's a likely potential for developing resistance or not having a helpful response? And then going into some detail on how new is this, how long has it been tried for this or something like this, and what might we expect based on prior research or the mechanism of action about where that resistance might develop. So lastly, make sure you check the rubric. It is telling you, again, make sure it's an active investigation, make sure that you are describing the mechanism of action, and make sure that you have all of those sections there, including citing your sources and having a references page. So this concludes our discussion for today. I hope that this demo of searching for information and trying out different searches for understanding where you will find certain types of information, how to decode those drug names. I hope that this has been helpful for you, whether you're working on this particular assignment or you are looking at this potential genre of writing to expand your CV and contribute to the field. If you have any questions, you can email us at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. You can schedule an appointment by going to my.acu.edu or visit us on the Online Writing Center website for access to templates, videos, guides, and many other things. That's it.